Where does bias come from? Why is it still around? Why is it something that we do? And we do it a lot. We do it a lot every day. So let's go way, way, way back in time. Hunter-gatherer time. So you're back there, you're hunting, maybe you're gathering. You look in the bushes and you see something kind of move in that shadow behind the tree. Is that something that I can eat? Is that something I can eat that's going to eat me? Something I can eat, something's going to eat me. And we have a snap moment to decide what to do. This rapid decision making is something that the human animal and a lot of other sentient beings have the ability to do. It's really just making a decision quick enough that we can react in time to save our life. In this case, either run toward the cow because we need to eat, we need to catch it, or run away from the tiger because it's going to catch us and eat us. This is where essentially biases were born to be very powerful. In modern language, at least in English, we have a word for this. We call it inference, or to infer something. This bias, this kind of shortcut, this snap decision, we're inferring a conclusion without having to look at all the evidence. So an example is if you can smell and see smoke, you can infer there's a fire. You don't have to walk over to the fire to confirm. You can just get out of the building, get to safety. It's how we slam on the brakes quick enough in traffic if someone slams on their brakes in front of us. This automatic response time is something that basically is our bias brain at work. We've already made the conclusion, and so we're able to act quicker, as opposed to, that car is slowing down. I should probably hit my brake. That's too late. So we need to move a little bit faster. That quick decision making, the decision that's being made is essentially just a sorting mechanism. Do I want this? Do I not want this? Do I prefer this? Do I not prefer this? Is this familiar to me? Is this unfamiliar to me? Which psychologists will call in-group, out-group thinking, especially when it comes to social engagements. But it's everything. We sort everything. Which, yes, people we want in our in-group and our out-group. Which ideas we accept and don't accept about the world. Which vegetables we want on our plate or don't want. It's all the same sorting that we're doing. Where an in-group is something, especially when it comes to people that are like me in some way. Like me because me look like me, talk similarly, have a similar background, come from a similar part of the globe, whatever similarity might be there. It's just basically something it's familiar, we prefer it, and we move usually toward people in that group. The opposite, obviously, is out-group. It's people who are not like me. We also have another word for this, different. Different can get us into trouble because we're all different. We all have a unique way of seeing the world, though we still are able to do this kind of grouping, in-group, out-group, of things that are familiar to me, unfamiliar to me. We tend to move away from those out-group things, those different things. Now, we're also doing this sorting action about, you can even say that, what is that number? That's a lot of zeros. Billions and billions and billions of times, we're doing these calculations, these in-group, out-group sorting, yes, I like, no, I don't like. And we're only given a limited window in terms of our conscious mind that we can be aware of these decisions. We're only consulted for about 40 of those billions and billions and billions, and that's per second. So a reason why you'll sometimes hear this topic called unconscious bias, sometimes called cognitive bias or descriptive bias. The unconscious part, I think, comes from this, we're only getting a limited window of consciousness onto all these decisions. We can do something about those 40, but we're really limited in our sense of our body is working on our behalf constantly. We're only given a few moments to really consider what we can do differently. Affinity is number one. Affinity means I like the look of you. Whatever that means to different people. Sometimes you look like me, like all the Homer Simpsons look pretty identical. It could be I find this person attractive in some way. It could be I like their style sense. I like where they went to school because it's the same school as me. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter the criteria. What matters is that we prefer probably that person over other people, right? And that's not a bad thing intrinsically. It's how we pick our best of friends. It's how we pick our people we prefer in our inner circle. We have an affinity for. The issue is especially apparent when we're doing hiring, right? We're doing recruiting of any kind. So we got two candidates, candidate A, candidate B. Candidate A, you just had a dazzling conversation with them. Every sentence was perfectly ended, and you picked up on each other's jokes, and it was a great seamless conversation. Candidate B was good, not stellar, not dazzling, but good. Just good. They did a good job. I think all of us would probably like, oh yeah, I'm going for candidate A. I'd rather enjoy that person's company. It's a great thing, and that's not a bad thing. Again, what does happen though is for the people we prefer, for those we have an affinity for, we're less likely to ask the tough questions or do our due diligence on that person's interview. For example, we might not ask the question to decide, do they have the technical competency? Have they worked with this technology long enough? Have they worked with clients of this caliber? Or have they worked in healthcare enough? Like whatever those tough questions might be, we might just not ask them for the person we like. We'll just fill in the blanks. Like, oh yeah, they'll be fine. Again, that's not going to guaranteed lead us to problems, but if we're not asking the tough questions, and we really ought to be doing that to make sure that everybody's expected to be good as part of this environment, we're not going to ask those questions as often. Halo horns bias is similar, and I think most of us think of halo bias, horns bias as the angel on your shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. And this is similar, but instead of it being on our shoulders, a halo bias is when we interact with a person and they always have a glowy halo on their shoulder. They always have that angel there, and we always kind of think, oh yeah, they're great and they're going to be great no matter what they try, is kind of the sentiment. Opposite side, the horns bias, that person always has a devil on their shoulder, and you just think, ugh, person's never going to amount to anything, and why are they even here? They're pulling the team down. All this stuff that we say when we don't like the look of someone, or we don't like their work, whatever it is. Now, there's another way to call this. This is a grudge. This is a positive grudge or a negative grudge. It goes both ways for halo horns bias. If someone has a halo bias, meaning a lot of important people or enough important people think they're great, they give, it's usually a first impression that makes this happen, like a great presentation or, a great interaction at a all hands or whatever it is. These people who get the halo bias, basically everyone that fills in the blanks of, yep, they're going to be great. They're going to, no matter what they try, they'll be fine, and kind of leave them alone. But if that person is not showing up and not being good, like they come into work maybe twice a week, they don't respond to their emails for their clients or from their internal coworkers. I mean, that's pulling down the team. That's a performance issue, and they're not showing up. That's not an inclusive environment. But if enough people have a halo bias for them, that person just might skate for a while. And that's not helping the team be productive and be a team at all. On the other side, a horns bias. If someone is, truly the mastermind of this product or this technology, or just really has an expertise that we can't do without, and one time there's a bad presentation, or they rubbed the wrong executive the wrong way, or had a bad interaction in one team, I don't know what it is. If they get a horns bias and they actually are the mastermind and the one who's driving all this, if enough people think they have a bad grudge for them, a horns bias for them, they might end up definitely not getting a chance to be sharing all their expertise. They're probably just going to kind of fade into the background and probably going to leave and take that expertise with them. So essentially, I just say to this one in halo horns, just be aware of why we're holding grudges. Sometimes we forget even the reason. Like, well, actually, why do I think that person's good or that person's bad? Just kind of getting more information constantly. That's why real-time feedback and kind of using recognition is a good way to not just know how you're doing, but you can get a more time-updated view of how people are doing instead of just applying these grudges, and hopefully that fills in the rest. Confirmation bias is about research, the research that we do in our jobs. I'll let you read through the comment because it does a pretty good job of explaining it on its own. Like I said, this is when we do research. Now I'll give you an example right from the Health Grades Analytics and Insights team, a group that is writing SQL queries to find the data, find the truth of how did this health system do, or how did this campaign do, or whatever it is. Part of their actual process, like in their order of operations, before they even hit the command, the key to get that results of that test, they have someone else peer review what they wrote in terms of the SQL query, so that there's not bias in that query. Because if we have an intention, like an hypothesis we want to prove, we're going to find data to prove that no matter what. This is something that's possible. If we build that objectivity into our process where someone else checks before we even hit the results, we can't give that bias unnecessarily. We can't let our bias interfere. So this might mean building something into your process. This might mean building in, just a mental note before you send an email or send a message of any kind, is kind of one extra, okay, is there any bias in this? Am I trying to prove something? Just like maybe that can help get some of that objectivity back. Now, again, it's not a guaranteed problem that we have, we want to prove good news for our client, or we want to have something good to say, but it would be as if we only took the good news and threw out the bad. That's what confirmation bias essentially is doing. It'd be as if in our 5-star reviews on healthgrades.com, only 3, 4, and 5-star reviews were accepted, and 1 and 2s were just not shown. Sure, that would make all docs look great and all these things, but if there's actually root problems that are happening and people are reporting them in those 1 and 2-star ratings, that's something that is just as valuable, not just the consumer, but to us. So confirmation bias is about keeping everything objective as much as possible and not letting our hunger to prove a hypothesis get ahead of that. And the last one, groupthink bias, is really apparent in meetings, especially meetings where we make decisions as a group. And first, around the table, you can see this is an all-white male group in this comic. That's maybe a little more biased group because there's not a lot of diverse perspectives in there. We're likely to fall into groupthink when we all agree. Because it's not about race, it's not about gender, it's not about really any particular group. Groupthink occurs when we find ourselves doing this hypocritical thing where we had one conclusion walking into the meeting and we find ourselves making the exact opposite decision as a vote. So I'll give you an example. Like in this comic, they're saying like, no, we can't do this. No, I can't vote. Ugh, that's not going to be a good idea. And everyone's voting yes, regardless. There's a story I heard from another presenter about diversity. She worked for a video game company. It was on the executive team there. And this company was going to put out this big new title, the latest graphic, everything, coolest new stuff, best voice actors, best music, everything. And they did a ton of work and they sent out their demo and launched it and everyone did not like it. The community did not like this. They kind of sent it back and said, no, you need to fix this. This needs more time to cook here. Like it was broken, it had bugs. It just wasn't what they were planning to release. So inside the walls of the company, in various teams, various hallways and hushed tones, people having conversations are like, okay, yeah, we need to put the brakes on this. We need to delay some marketing effort. We'll vote and make sure we get some extra time. Yeah, here we go. Everyone kind of agreed outside the walls, but they went into that executive team meeting and everybody agreed to go forward as planned and not put any delay in place. And the game did flop and they lost a ton of money, a ton of reputation, and a ton of employees because everybody was just so annoyed in the process. Groupthink is where it's unsafe in a room to be the person to raise your hand and be the voice of reason. I'm not saying we need we always need a contrary opinion or we always need a devil's advocate, but if someone does have an objective thing they need to bring up and it's not safe in the room because everyone would kind of, rib them, but like, you're just a person, we don't need to think about that. We're just going to go and do this. If that becomes it, that's groupthink. That's where it's not safe to be the outsider. Right? It's not safe to be the one to say, I have a contrary opinion. I know you don't want to hear it. If there's no opening for that person to be taken seriously, we're just going to keep confirming our own groupthink bias. We're going to keep going in the direction. And it's more important to be within the confines of the group rather than making objective decisions. And that's dangerous, especially when we're at the head of the company or the head of a product or the head of a process. When we have the final say, we got to be careful of our groupthink bias. When we have issues with bias, either we're the one offending or we're the one who's been offended, there is a difference in intent and impact. So I'll take it from the view of being the speaker. When we intend to say something nice or maybe complimentary or helpful, but we notice this definitely does not come off very well at all. Remember, intent is rarely the problem. It's just no one can see it. I don't think anybody on this call has a problem with intent. I don't think any of you get up in the morning, go to the mirror, twirl your mustache and go, I'm gonna bring evil into the world some more today. I don't think that's anybody's game. However, it is almost impossible, probably actually impossible to prove our intent to anyone. Even if we say, my intent is positive, and someone may not believe you. So it's not something we can prove and you really need to spend extra time expressing what our intent was. What we can do, though, is we can learn how to ask about impact, flip that around and make it less about what we intended and try and be really objective about what our impact was. And what we do when we make these assumptions, maybe what we'll call it, maybe a bias, we harm the other person through something called a microaggression, or sometimes called a microinequity. I'll let you read through this description that actually Dr. Su coined the term, defined. You see that phrase in the middle, whether intentional or unintentional? Like, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what impact did it have? Did it lift up that person or did it ruin their day a little bit? An example here on the right side of the screen, seeing someone of Asian descent and asking, so you're Chinese, right? Or someone in scrubs who's female, assuming they're a nurse. Someone male in scrubs, assuming they're a doctor. Saying, like, I have one example. Hold on, let me cut to camera B here. I have red hair, for those of you who don't see me. This is a very lightweight microaggression. I find it more funny these days. But whenever anybody in conversation says the term redheaded stepchild, they look at me for a second, realize they shouldn't, and then they're like, oh, that was offensive. That's a microinequity, microaggression. I don't take much pain from it. That one's kind of funny. But as you can imagine, there are some deep hitting ones of these. I'll turn off my camera. If anyone would like, no expectation at all, because this is a pretty personal thing. If you've heard any of these microaggressions or recognized any, either for yourself or others, put those in the chat so people can recognize them. One we had in another class was someone said, yeah, I have gray hair, and people now speak a lot louder to me and ask me if I need assistance a lot. I'm like, I'm 52 years old. Like, I don't need assistance. Don't yell at me. That's a microaggression. Even though it's intended to be helpful or supportive, does not come off the way it was. About bias is we can be conscious, and man, that means not necessarily about paying more attention or doing extra effort. It's really just resisting those distractions, turning over our phone, you know, or turning off notifications entirely, maybe not having the Slack app on our phone, maybe just having it on. Whatever you want to do, what works in your world, just to bring more focus. That's where we can usually catch ourselves a lot more effectively. Be courageous. That is a word we don't hear very often at work, but it takes a lot of courage to look at ourselves in the mirror, figuratively or literally, and say, yeah, what I said last week to that person, that did not go, that's the wrong thing to say. I should go talk to them and apologize. Oh, that's a big thing to do. That is a high road thing to do. That takes a lot of courage, a lot of emotional effort, a lot of heft to move to that action. So if you find yourself being able to do this, this is something to be proud of yourself for. If you hear people being the voice of reason in a room and they're kind of on their own, it's courageous to back them up, especially if what they're saying makes sense. Wherever you feel open and you can feel comfortable, courage is, those possibilities are everywhere. And this other one too is not normally a word we use at work, compassionate. Let me break it down though to its Latin root words to give more context. Compassion means suffer together. We're all in the same boat. Remember, we all have the human brain. We all suffer the human condition. We're all going to do this. We're all going to say the wrong thing. We're all going to be said the wrong thing too. And we're going to take it home. We're all going to be sufferers of this. And that's what the cost of connecting. So as much as possible, be nice to yourself. Cut yourself some slack. You know I've gone home and like berated myself. Like, oh, you couldn't have said that. You're such a bad person. What's wrong with you? I do this all in my head for like hours. And it's not helpful energy. It's not a good use of time or energy. It just bogs us down. We don't learn as quickly. We just spend more time, cycling through it. And as much as you're willing to offer slack to other people, do so. I'm not suggesting people can just say what they want and get away with it. But remember, we're all sufferers of this bias thing. They may not even know what they're saying is biased. So as much slack as you can cut people when you're either helping them learn about their bias or just getting through that meeting or whatever it is, as much as you're willing to offer other people will help. Again, from our position, from our level of influence, each of our actions, if it's intentional to bring people together and let people, learn from each other rather than, that person's never going to amount to anything, get them out of here. The more chances we are willing to give people, the more chances we have to build that inclusive environment.